In the quiet corners of the world where ancient faiths have flourished for millennia, a darkness gathers. Imagine a world where the act of worship becomes an act of courage, where the whispers of prayer are tinged with fear. Christianity and Judaism, two of the world's oldest monotheistic faiths, have long been intertwined with the story of civilization. Yet today, these ancient communities find themselves facing an unprecedented wave of persecution, their very existence threatened by a virulent strain of radical extremism. The statistics, stark and unforgiving, paint a grim picture of the scale of the crisis. According to recent reports, over 380 million Christians worldwide face high levels of persecution, their faith tested daily by discrimination, intimidation, and violence. In Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, a toxic mix of religious extremism, ethnic tensions, and government inaction has fueled a wave of violence against Christian communities. Groups like Boko Haram, whose very name translates to Western education is forbidden, have unleashed a reign of terror, targeting churches, schools, and villages, leaving a trail of death and destruction in their wake. In the ancient lands of the Middle East, where Christianity and Judaism first took root, a slow and silent exodus has been underway for decades. Once thriving communities, integral parts of the region's rich tapestry of cultures and faiths, have dwindled to a fraction of their former size, driven out by a combination of persecution, discrimination, and the ever-present threat of violence. While statistics can help us grasp the scale of the persecution facing Christians and Jews, they cannot convey the profound human cost of this crisis. Each number represents a life touched by fear, displacement, and loss, a story of resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. To truly grasp the complexities of the persecution faced by Christians and Jews today, we must turn back the pages of history, delving into the annals of time to understand the intricate tapestry of relationships between these faiths and the rise of radical interpretations within Islam. The origins of these tensions are multifaceted, rooted in theological differences, power struggles, and socio-political dynamics that have ebbed and flowed over centuries. One of the most significant historical developments that cast a long shadow over Christian and Jewish communities living in Muslim-majority lands was the concept of dhimmitude. This system, codified under Islamic law during the early centuries of Islamic expansion, established a hierarchical social order in which Muslims held a privileged position, while non-Muslims, particularly people of the book, Christians and Jews, were granted a protected but subordinate status. The persecution of Christians and Jews in the modern era is inextricably linked to the rise of radical Islamic movements that draw upon a distorted and selective interpretation of Islamic scripture and history. These groups, such as ISIS, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab, exploit religious fervor and manipulate theological concepts to incite violence and justify their brutal campaigns against those they deem infidels or enemies of Islam. The African continent, a land of vibrant cultures, ancient traditions, and burgeoning faith communities, has become a tragic epicenter of religiously motivated violence against Christians and Jews. Extremist groups, fueled by a toxic brew of religious extremism, political instability, and economic disparities, have carved a path of destruction across the continent, leaving shattered communities and a growing humanitarian crisis in their wake. Shadows over Asia, from Afghanistan to Yemen to Syria. Across the vast expanse of Asia, From the war-torn landscapes of Afghanistan to the ancient communities of the Middle East, Christians and Jews face a precarious existence. Their faiths are tested by a combination of state-sponsored repression, societal discrimination, and the ever-present threat of extremist violence. In Afghanistan, the Taliban's return to power in 2021 has had a devastating impact on religious minorities. Christians, a tiny and largely covert community, have been driven further underground. Their places of worship are forced into secrecy, their very existence threatened by the Taliban's strict interpretation of Islamic law. The few remaining Jews, remnants of a once thriving community, have all but vanished. Their synagogues are silent, their stories fading into the mists of time. In Iran, Christians face ongoing persecution from the Islamic Republic. Their churches are closely monitored, and their religious gatherings are subject to raids and arrests. Converts from Islam, deemed apostates, face particularly harsh treatment, often imprisoned or even sentenced to death for daring to choose a different faith. Yemen, ravaged by years of civil war and humanitarian catastrophe, offers a stark example of how conflict can exacerbate religious persecution. The Houthis, a Shia Islamist group that controls much of the country, have targeted Jews and Christians, accusing them of being agents of foreign powers. The ancient Jewish community in Yemen, once a vibrant part of the country's social fabric, has been decimated. Its members are forced to flee or live in hiding. The global reach, when intolerance knows no borders. The persecution of Christians and Jews is not confined to distant lands or war-torn regions. It is a global phenomenon. Its tendrils reach across borders, fueled by a potent mix of extremist ideologies, online radicalization, and a resurgence of nationalist and populist movements that often scapegoat minorities. In Europe, Jewish communities, still haunted by the horrors of the Holocaust, face a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism. Synagogues require armed guards, Jewish schools and community centers are fortified against attack, and the specter of violence casts a long shadow over daily life. The rise of far-right political parties, with their nationalist agendas and often thinly veiled anti-Semitic rhetoric, has contributed to a climate of fear and uncertainty. In the United States, a nation founded on principles of religious freedom, Christian communities have not been immune to the scourge of violence. The targeting of churches, often motivated by racial hatred or extremist ideologies, serves as a chilling reminder that even in societies that pride themselves on tolerance and diversity, the forces of intolerance can still find fertile ground. The global nature of this crisis demands a global response. It requires a concerted effort from governments, international organizations, religious leaders, and individuals of all faiths and backgrounds to stand united against hatred, intolerance, and violence. For the persecution of one community, regardless of faith or ethnicity, diminishes us all. Silence is not an option. We must speak out, act decisively, and work tirelessly to build a world where all people are free to practice their faith without fear. A World Without Faith, the Erosion of Diversity and Hope. The targeted persecution of Christians and Jews represents not merely an assault on specific faiths, but a profound threat to the very fabric of our diverse and interconnected world. It is an assault on the fundamental right to freedom of belief, a right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a cornerstone of any just and equitable society. When individuals and communities are targeted for their beliefs, when the freedom to worship is denied or threatened, it undermines the very foundations of tolerance, respect, and understanding upon which peaceful coexistence depends. The communities under threat, Christians in the Middle East, Jews in Europe, and countless others, are not isolated enclaves. They are integral threads in the rich tapestry of human civilization, their histories intertwined with the development of art, music, literature, philosophy, and law. To erase their presence, to silence their voices, is to diminish us all. to rob ourselves of the beauty and richness that diversity brings to our world. Beyond the cultural loss, the persecution of these faiths represents a profound assault on hope itself. For many facing persecution, their faith is a source of strength and resilience, a beacon of light in the darkest of times. It provides solace amidst suffering, purpose in the face of adversity, and a belief in a better future. To extinguish this flame of hope is to condemn entire communities to despair, to rob them of the spiritual sustenance that sustains them in their struggle for survival. The world we seek to build, a world free from fear, intolerance, and violence, requires the contributions of all faiths and beliefs. It requires dialogue, understanding, and a willingness to embrace our common humanity. The persecution of Christians and Jews, therefore, is not their struggle alone. It is a shared struggle, a collective challenge that demands a united response from people of all faiths and none. Beyond borders, the global threat to security and stability. While the most visible consequences of religious persecution are felt most acutely by those directly targeted, the ripple effects of this crisis extend far beyond the communities under attack. Intolerance, left unchecked, has a dangerous tendency to metastasize, to spread its poison across borders and sow the seeds of discord in even the most seemingly stable societies. The persecution of Christians and Jews today, therefore, should be viewed not as isolated incidents but as warning signs, harbingers of a growing threat to global security and stability. The rise of extremist groups, fueled by ideologies of hatred and division, poses a direct threat to international peace and security. These groups, often operating across borders and exploiting ungoverned spaces, have demonstrated a ruthless capacity for violence, targeting not only religious minorities, but also anyone who opposes their twisted worldview. The attacks in Paris, Brussels, Manchester, and countless other cities around the world serve as grim reminders that extremism is not confined to distant battlefields. It is a global threat that requires a coordinated global response. Beyond the immediate threat of terrorism, the persecution of religious minorities can fuel broader cycles of violence and instability. When communities are targeted for their beliefs, when their rights are denied and their voices silenced, it creates fertile ground for resentment, radicalization, and conflict. This, in turn, can destabilize entire regions, leading to mass displacement, humanitarian crises, and the breakdown of law and order. The persecution of Christians and Jews, therefore, should not be viewed solely through a religious lens, but also through the prism of geopolitics and international security. It is a threat that demands a comprehensive and multifaceted response, one that addresses not only the symptoms but also the root causes of extremism, intolerance, and violence. This includes promoting interfaith dialogue, strengthening the rule of law, addressing economic disparities, and fostering inclusive societies that value diversity and respect the rights of all citizens. A call to conscience, our shared humanity at stake. In an era often marked by division and discord, where the forces of fear and intolerance seem to be gaining ground, it is easy to feel overwhelmed, to succumb to a sense of helplessness and despair. Yet, it is precisely in these moments that we must summon the better angels of our nature, to remember that we are not passive bystanders in the face of injustice, but active participants in shaping the world we want to inhabit. The persecution of Christians and Jews is not merely a tragedy unfolding on distant shores. It is a test of our collective conscience, a challenge to our shared humanity. It is a call to action, a summons to stand in solidarity with those who are persecuted for their beliefs, to raise our voices against hatred, and to work tirelessly for a world where all people are free to practice their faith without fear. This call to action is not addressed solely to governments and international organizations. It is a call to each and every one of us. We must educate ourselves about the realities of religious persecution, challenge intolerance and discrimination in our own communities, and support organizations working to protect the rights of those facing persecution. We must use our voices to amplify the stories of those who have been silenced, to bear witness to their suffering, and to demand justice and accountability. The path ahead may be long and the challenges daunting, but let us never forget that hope is a stubborn thing, that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has an unyielding capacity for resilience, compassion, and love. By standing together, united in our commitment to freedom, justice, and human dignity, we can build a world where the shadows of extremism are dispelled by the light of tolerance, understanding, and respect for all. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. As we've journeyed through these narratives of loss, fear, and displacement, a single question echoes. Where do we find hope amidst this storm of intolerance? The answer, defying the shadows, lies in the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, particularly within the very communities facing persecution. In the heart of Nigeria, where churches lie in ruins, communities gather amidst the rubble, their faith unshaken. In hushed whispers in Iran, ancient prayers continue, a testament to the enduring strength of belief. Across the globe, individuals and families, though forced to worship in secret, refuse to let their faith be extinguished. This quiet defiance, this unwavering commitment to their beliefs, is a testament to the power of hope to flourish even in the most barren of landscapes. But this hope, fragile and hard-won, cannot be sustained by those facing persecution alone. Their courage must be met with a global chorus of solidarity, a commitment from people of all faiths and none to stand against hatred and intolerance in all its forms. Silence, as we've seen throughout history, is not neutrality. It is complicity. Every act of awareness, every voice raised against injustice, every effort to support those persecuted becomes a spark of light in the darkness. It is in these individual acts of courage, multiplied across borders and cultures, that we begin to weave a tapestry of hope strong enough to withstand the storms of extremism. The time for action is now. A call to global engagement. The persecution of Christians and Jews is a global crisis that demands a global response. This is not someone else's problem. It is a shared responsibility that calls upon each of us to examine our own biases, to challenge prejudice within our own communities, and to advocate for policies that promote tolerance and understanding. Governments must be held accountable for upholding the fundamental right to freedom of religion or belief for all citizens. International organizations must be empowered to act swiftly and decisively to protect vulnerable communities and hold perpetrators of violence to account. But beyond these institutional responses, it is the collective conscience of humanity that must be awakened. We must educate ourselves and others about the realities of religious persecution. We must support organizations working on the front lines to provide aid, comfort, and a voice to those who have been silenced. We must use our platforms, however large or small, to shine a light on this crisis and inspire others to act. The path forward will not be easy. It will require unwavering commitment, persistent engagement, and an unyielding belief in our shared humanity. But if we are to create a world where future generations can live and worship without fear, a world where the shadows of extremism no longer threaten to extinguish the light of faith, the time for action is now. The choice is ours, to stand on the sidelines as silent witnesses or to become beacons of hope in a world desperately yearning for light.